the army that officially doesn't exist. What if the most powerful army shaping modern history does not appear on any official record at all? And why would a state choose to hide that level of force in the first place? There is the army you see on television, with flags, uniforms, and parades, and then there is the army your government swears it does not have, even while it quietly changes the fate of entire countries. The subject of this video is that second army, the army that, on paper, does not exist. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about a non-existent army in the real world, deniable units buried inside intelligence agencies, covert paramilitaries raised through proxy militias, and black budget forces that operate from unmarked bases under names that never appear in public law. Officially, they are not part of the armed forces. However, as we learn from history, they often decide when wars begin, when governments fall, and when a conflict is quietly erased. First, let's take a look at what non-existent actually means in practice. In many states, tens of billions of dollars disappear each year into classified or black budgets. It is claimed that these funds are used for sensitive national security needs, but the line between intelligence work and undeclared warfare quickly blurs. Shell companies buy aircraft and weapons. Training grounds are hidden inside existing bases, with no unit patch, no public order of battle, and no open debate in any parliament or among any member states of an alliance. This suggests that the real symbol of modern power is not the public uniform, but the ability to deploy force without leaving fingerprints. So far, we have only described the structure. The consequences are much more dramatic. Across the last century, we see coups that toppled elected leaders, regime changes that redrew regional maps, and covert wars that raged for years, while governments insisted that no regular troops were involved. Later, archives opened, whistleblowers spoke, and we learned that specialized teams, deniable militias, and private military contractors had been directed from the shadows. At the time, these units were officially fiction, yet their operations were as real as any open invasion. In this series, we will treat this like dissecting a fictional shadow army, but our evidence base is entirely historical. We will discuss recruitment, command chains, legal cover, and the internal throne of authority that sits above normal oversight in detail, using real cases where hidden forces left visible scars. By the end, you will see how a state can build a world government scale projection of power in the form of an army that, on paper, never existed at all. And in the next section, we will start by mapping how such an army is designed from the ground up. Why study a shadow army at all? So why spend this much time on an army that, officially, is not supposed to exist at all? Today, we are speaking about the logic behind the shadows themselves, because if we understand why states build hidden forces, we can start to see where they are buried in plain sight. In this video, we promise completeness. We are going to map how a shadow army is built, funded, commanded, deployed, and finally exposed using real historical patterns. First, let's take a look at the public structure versus the hidden power. On paper, you have regular armed forces, clear uniforms, and neat chains of command. However, as we learn from black ops units, deniable militias, and private military companies, there is often a second layer, operating under intelligence agencies, shell companies, or volunteer, labels that never appear in normal defense statistics. We will discuss the symbolic layer in detail as well. Every world government uses symbols, flags, and heroic narratives to frame its violence as legitimate. A shadow army needs its own cover stories in the form of humanitarian missions, training teams, or local self-defense groups. This suggests that when you see a small emblem, a vague acronym, or a unit that is always advising but never fighting, you may be looking at the mask of a much larger hidden structure sitting behind the visible throne of power. Beyond that, we will enter the conspiracy layer, the secret budgets, the classified authorizations, and the bureaucratic tricks that move men and weapons off the books. Many states use black budgets that parliaments or congresses cannot fully audit. Intelligence services maintain paramilitary wings whose actions are reported upward through a different channel than regular armies. So far, this has allowed governments to orchestrate coups, proxy wars, and regime changes while insisting to their own member states that they were never involved. To keep this grounded, we will move through historical context, the geography of secret bases, and daily life inside the shadows. We will look at remote airstrips, offshore training camps, and prisons that do not exist on any map. We will listen to how veterans describe fighting in wars that it is claimed never happened. Everything you need to know about food, pay, discipline, and fear inside these units will help us understand how such an army actually functions from day to day. The practical payoff for you is simple. Once you see these patterns, you can read news about local militias, security contractors, or spontaneous uprisings very differently. You will be able to spot propaganda, question official timelines, and ask who really authorized an operation when no one accepts responsibility. Finally, we will confront the ethical and political stakes, war crimes without accountability, the erosion of democracy, and leaders waging wars their populations never voted for. And at the end, we will speculate about a fully deniable, world-spanning army built today, hidden inside normal member states and global supply chains as a bridge into the next part of the series. Before we go deeper, I need one thing from you. Before we go deeper into how that kind of system could actually work, we need one quick thing from you. Today, we are speaking about an army that officially does not exist. To reconstruct how that kind of force operates in the real world, this video is built on a lot of slow work in the background. Combing through declassified documents, reading case studies of proxy wars, following budget lines through black funds and shell companies, and comparing historical examples where governments used militias and private contractors as a hidden extension of state power. What looks like a simple diagram on screen is usually the end of hours spent trying to connect one vague reference in an intelligence report to a coup that, at the time, was blamed on local unrest. Long-form breakdowns like this are not what the platform or the algorithm naturally favors. The system prefers short, simple answers. This suggests that videos which question how power, secrecy, and war really work are always going to be slightly disadvantaged. However, as we learn from the history of the world government in fiction and from secret armies in reality, what survives is what is reinforced early. For this channel, that reinforcement is engagement in the first few minutes. If you act now, the video is far more likely to be shown to people who would never normally see a discussion like this. So, first, let's take a look at what you can do. If you are still watching and you want everything you need to know about hidden forces to exist in one place, please take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment with your first question about secret armies so far. It can be as simple as who actually gives the order, or how do they pay for this without Parliament noticing? Even if you plan to watch passively with the video in another tab, that one action tells the system that this topic is worth pushing beyond our usual circle. We know interruptions can break immersion, so this is the only real pause we are going to take before diving into the internal structure and history of these forces. From this point on, we will discuss command chains, legal gray zones, and specific case studies in detail in the form of a continuous narrative. No more stepping out to ask for support. By engaging, you are not just helping a single upload, you are effectively joining a small community that wants to look past the official symbol, past the empty throne of public narratives, and into the mechanisms that states use when they do not want their own member states or their own citizens to see what is being done in their name. If that is the kind of conversation you want more of, make your presence visible now, and then we will move directly into how a non-existent army is actually built. From intro to anatomy, defining our first target. So, we have set the stakes. Now, we need to move from the big question of a non-existent army to the concrete anatomy of how it lives inside a state that claims to be transparent. Today, we are speaking about the point where visible institutions and invisible force meet. First, let's take a look at what is officially on the chart. Most modern states present you with a clear structure of power. A defense ministry that commands the regular army, an interior ministry that manages police and gendarmerie, and one or more intelligence agencies that operate in the shadows but still appear in budgets and laws. On paper, this resembles the world government in one piece holding an empty throne above roughly 170 member states. Authority is distributed, the symbols promise order, and the public can trace who is supposed to answer for what. However, as we learn when we study real history, this visible chart is only the first layer. Parallel to the public hierarchy, a second, quieter structure can be built in the form of special units, proxy militias, and private military companies. It is claimed that these are separate actors, merely partners or contractors, but their weapons, training, and funding flow from the same center. This suggests that we have dual hierarchies, the one you see in official documents, and the one that actually directs deniable force. In the public hierarchy, a general or minister signs the order and takes responsibility. In the hidden hierarchy, a small circle in an intelligence service, a presidential office, or even an informal council gives instructions that never appear on record. Black budgets, shell companies, and classified memoranda allow money and equipment to move without normal parliamentary scrutiny. So far, the state can claim that its regular army and its member states respect international law, while operations that violate those norms are quietly outsourced to units that do not exist. This dual structure creates two stories about how force is used. The official story is simple: there was no intervention, or if there was, it followed legal procedures and clear chains of command. The off-the-books reality is more complex. Intelligence-run paramilitary teams may support a coup, contractors may fight in a proxy war, or local militias may receive covert backing to reshape a region. When things go wrong, leaders can deny involvement, blame rogue actors, or hide behind classification. In the next part of the video, we will discuss this public-facing structure in detail. We will move step by step through the visible ministries, agencies, and uniforms, and ask where a secret army could be hidden among them without breaking the surface. Once we understand how the official throne is built, we can start to see the shadow seated behind it, and the moment when that shadow stops obeying its creators. The official org chart. What the public is meant to see. First, let's take a look at the stage itself, the official throne room that every citizen is allowed to see. In a standard modern democracy, the security structure is presented as simple, rational, and almost self-explanatory. You vote, they govern, the armed forces obey the law. It is claimed that nothing important happens with a gun or a drone unless it passes through this visible chain of command. At the top, we usually find elected officials. A president, prime minister, or cabinet sits in the symbolic position of ultimate power, much like an empty throne that reassures you no one person rules alone. Below them, there is a defense ministry that translates political decisions into military plans, and a foreign ministry that handles alliances, treaties, and public diplomacy with other member states. On paper, this triangle of offices defines when and how force can be used. Beneath that political layer stand the regular armed forces. Officially, they are divided into clear branches: Army, Navy, Air Force, sometimes cyber or space commands, each with uniforms, ranks, and published doctrines. Their bases are mapped, their recruitment campaigns are televised, and their wars are declared in the form of parliamentary votes or public addresses. So far, everything you need to know about national power, appears to fit inside this diagram. Alongside the military, we see the publicly acknowledged intelligence agencies. These organizations are often framed as the eyes and ears of the state rather than an extra fist. They are given acronyms, logos, even museum exhibits to normalize their presence. Today, we are speaking about the way this world government style of presentation turns secrecy into a familiar symbol instead of a threat, suggesting that even spies sit under the same democratic roof. Transparency itself is carefully staged. Budgets are published with impressive precision, line after line of numbers that seem to account for every bullet. Parliamentary or congressional oversight committees hold televised hearings where officials answer hard questions. Press briefings offer regular updates, complete with podiums, flags, and carefully chosen phrases about legality and accountability. This suggests that there is no dark corner left unlit because every program is at least mentioned by name. However, as we learn from history, the most sensitive instruments of force usually appear only at the edges of this chart. Special forces units are acknowledged but rarely described in detail, operating in small teams that can be moved across borders quietly. Intelligence paramilitaries blur the line between soldier and spy, carrying weapons under legal frameworks that are far less visible. Advisory missions abroad put uniformed personnel inside foreign conflicts while allowing leaders to insist that there are no combat troops, only trainers. All of this is used rhetorically to reassure you that every bullet is lawful, controlled, and audited. The message is simple. If a soldier fires, a minister is responsible, and if a minister abuses power, a parliament or court will intervene. That is the story you are meant to believe. In the next part, we will discuss in detail how a real machinery of deniable violence can sit just outside this official diagram, feeding on the same budgets and buildings while never quite existing on paper. Where the shadow hooks in, intelligence, contractors, proxies. So, if the clean organizational chart is the story you are meant to believe, where does the real shadow hook into the system? Today, we are speaking about the three main anchor points that let a hidden army live right next to the official one, feeding on the same money and buildings while remaining technically invisible. First, let's take a look at intelligence agencies. On paper, they collect information and brief leaders. In practice, many of them maintain paramilitary wings, special units that train with the military, use the same weapons, and deploy to the same conflicts, but operate under an entirely different legal framework. Instead of open declarations of war and parliamentary votes, their actions are buried in classified findings and black budgets that almost no one in the member states can fully audit. This suggests that the rules we hear about apply mainly to the troops in uniform, not to the operatives who never officially enter the battlefield. So far, we have spoken about state institutions, but the next layer is even more deniable in the form of private military companies. These are legally separate corporations that recruit veterans, buy equipment, and sign contracts like any other business. It is claimed they simply provide security or training. However, as we learn from modern conflicts, the same companies can be quietly tasked with combat missions, regime change, or guarding strategic resources. Because they are not officially part of the army, governments can hire them through shell companies, disavow them when scandals break, or dissolve them overnight while the personnel and networks simply reappear under a new name. The third pillar is proxies, local militias and partner forces that carry the guns while someone else writes the script. Foreign officers may design their training programs, choose their commanders, and even sit in their operations rooms. Yet on paper, these fighters belong only to their own flag. When atrocities occur or a covert war is exposed, officials can point to the symbol on the armband and insist that these were independent actors, even if the weapons, salaries, and targets all flowed from abroad. To make this architecture work, states rely on bureaucratic tricks. Units that plan lead raids are rebranded as advisors. Soldiers who accompany local partners into battle become trainers. former commandos are rehired as security contractors and thus disappear from official casualty lists and parliamentary reports. Everything you need to know about the mission is technically written down somewhere, yet scattered across intelligence files, corporate ledgers, and aid programs so that no single document ever admits that a secret army exists. In later sections, we will discuss in detail specific case studies where these three pillars fuse together: intelligence officers, contractors, and proxies forming a single chain of command that can topple governments or fight entire wars while the public is told nothing happened at all. The two chains of command, on paper versus in practice. So far, we have looked at how this hidden army is built from intelligence officers, contractors, and proxies. But structure is only half the story. The real question is, who actually commands them when it is time to act? To answer that, we need to separate the chain of command that exists on paper from the one that operates in the dark. Officially, the hierarchy is simple. Elected leaders set policy, defense ministers and chiefs of staff translate that policy into plans, and field commanders execute orders under military law. This is the visible pyramid you see in hearings, press conferences, and strategy documents. It is claimed that every soldier, every weapon, and every operation ultimately answers to this legal framework, with clear responsibility flowing from the top down. However, as we learn when we study covert forces, there is a second pyramid fused to the first, tilted just enough that the lines no longer match. Intelligence directors, national security advisors, political fixers, and trusted loyalists form an informal network that can redirect or reinterpret orders before they ever reach the field. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about that shadow chain, the one that never appears on an organizational chart but still decides who lives, who dies, and which events are allowed to reach the news. First, let's take a look at how orders actually move. On paper, operations are approved in writing, logged, and archived. In practice, the most sensitive missions are often greenlit verbally, in the form of understandings reached in small meetings, phone calls, or private notes that never enter the official record. A president or minister might say, "We need this problem solved," while an intelligence chief replies, "Leave the details to us." No explicit instruction to deploy the hidden army is spoken, yet everyone in the room understands what is being requested. This suggests that ambiguity is not a flaw but a design. Vague mandates, compartmentalized briefings, and back-channel intermediaries ensure that no single document clearly links the head of state to a specific atrocity or coup. If an operation succeeds, the inner circle quietly takes credit. If it fails, each level can claim they were only following a broad policy or that an overzealous subordinate exceeded their mandate. Inside the regular military, this dual structure creates constant tension. Career officers see parallel units, funded from black budgets, bypassing regulations, skipping procurement rules, and answering to special coordinators instead of the normal chain. Some resent losing authority over battles fought in their area of responsibility. Others fear being made scapegoats for actions they did not authorize but are blamed for because the hidden army used their uniforms, their bases, or their radio frequencies. In addition to bruised egos, there are moments when these chains of command collide outright. Units loyal to intelligence patrons receive one set of instructions, while the legal hierarchy issues another. In some countries, this clash has ended in open mutiny, midnight coups, or massacres that were denied for decades. In the next sections, we will discuss in detail specific nights when the invisible pyramid stepped out of the shadows, and the world government-style fantasy of a single clean throne of power shattered in real time. Pattern break. When the shadow army turns inward, so far we have treated the shadow army as something projected outward, a hidden spear pointed at foreign enemies. For a moment, shift the camera. Imagine that same invisible pyramid turning around, not toward rival states, but toward the streets, ministries, and palaces of its own home country. First, let's take a look at a very different use case. A nervous leader looks at the regular army and does not see protection. They see a rival. The generals have their own history, their own networks, and in some systems, more legitimacy than the ruler who sits on the political throne. This suggests that if they want to survive, they need a second pillar of power, one that answers to them personally rather than to the constitution, parliament, or official chain of command. In practice, that counterweight often appears in the form of a loyal paramilitary. It is claimed to be a special guard, an internal security force, or an elite anti-terror unit. Officially, it might not even exist on the Defense Ministry's books. Instead, its salaries and weapons are buried in intelligence budgets, development funds, or shell companies that import communications equipment. Training happens on secluded bases run by the security services where the uniforms are unmarked and the paperwork is classified. Today, we are speaking about what happens when that secret force is pointed inward. These units can be deployed to crush protests before the regular police even arrive, to surround courts or parliaments on key voting days, or to escort ballot boxes during elections that must not be lost. Rivals inside the regime may find their offices bugged, their convoys mysteriously disarmed, or their supporters visited at night by men who, officially, do not belong to any branch of the state. The world government-style fantasy of neutral institutions is replaced by a reality in which loyalty to one person is the only real law. However, as we learn from history, this strategy carries a built-in risk. The moment a leader creates an armed structure outside normal oversight, they also create the ideal instrument for a palace coup. The same bodyguards who shield the ruler from the regular army are the ones standing closest when it is time to remove them. Intelligence-based militias, presidential guards, and deniable volunteer battalions have all, at different times, turned their guns around and decided that the throne would be better occupied by someone else. So, the internal shadow army is not only about controlling the narrative abroad, it is about disciplining member states, intimidating elites, and managing the home front through fear that can never be traced back on paper. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how specific regimes tried to ride this tiger using secret forces to rewrite domestic politics, and what happened on the nights when those forces stopped following orders and started making demands of their own. Budgets in the dark. How you hide an army on paper. Those nights when the secret forces start making their own demands leave one big question hanging over everything. How do you even hide an army like that in the first place? Today, we are speaking about the part of the story that never shows up in parades or on recruitment posters, but in quiet numbers on a spreadsheet. First, let's take a look at black budgets. In most modern systems, military spending is debated, voted on, and reported to member states or parliaments. However, there is always a slice that disappears behind the phrase, classified for national security. This is where covert armies live on paper. Entire programs are grouped into a single opaque line, with only a handful of insiders allowed to know that the number does not just cover satellites or intelligence, but training camps, weapons stockpiles, and deniable strike teams. So far, we have looked at visible chains of command, but the real trick is financial camouflage. Instead of a bold entry labeled Secret Army, the money is broken up and laundered through innocuous departments. Salaries might appear in the form of research grants for field studies, logistics might be buried inside infrastructure projects, and combat deployments can be disguised as vague consulting contracts. This suggests that what looks like a harmless development program can, in practice, be feeding a force that answers to a completely different throne of power. Shell companies and front NGOs are the next layer. Officially, they are private firms or humanitarian organizations. On the books, they lease warehouses, rent airfields, or purchase communications gear. In reality, those same entities pay the operatives, buy the weapons, and secure the bases. Because the contracts are signed with a civilian logo instead of a flag, no single document ever needs to admit that a government is maintaining a parallel army. It is claimed that this separation preserves plausible deniability. In practice, it mostly preserves confusion. To keep this structure intact, auditors and oversight bodies are managed very carefully. Some are kept entirely in the dark, simply blocked from accessing the relevant files. Others are given sanitized versions of the books, where sensitive lines are redacted or aggregated until no specific unit can be identified. Officially, the system is working because the totals add up and the legal procedures are followed. However, as we learn from declassified examples, the most important details are often hidden behind classification stamps, making real accountability impossible. In the next part, we will discuss in detail how these abstract mechanisms translated into real operations. Entire covert wars have been run through budgets that looked, on paper, like development aid or intelligence research. When we examine those case studies, you will see how a school-building initiative can become a counterinsurgency campaign, how a health program can mask weapons deliveries, and how a line of technical support can fund a coup that, officially, nobody ordered. Classified loopholes, law as a weapon of secrecy. Those disguised budgets only work because they plug into something even more powerful than money: law. The hidden army does not just slip through gaps in the rules. Entire legal categories are built so that it can move like water, changing shape whenever someone tries to grab it. Today, we are speaking about how the rulebook itself becomes a weapon of secrecy. First, let's take a look at the basic distinction that almost every modern state relies on. On paper, there is a clear line between military operations and intelligence operations. The army, it is claimed, fights declared wars under public statutes with clear chains of command. Intelligence agencies, however, collect information, run covert action, and operate in the shadows. The moment you classify a mission as intelligence rather than military, you often shift it into a different legal universe where normal battlefield law, open budgets, and even some parliamentary oversight simply do not apply. In many systems, this is reinforced by emergency powers and national security exemptions. Executives can sign secret findings, directives, or decrees that authorize covert action without the kind of full debate you would expect for sending troops abroad. In the United States, for example, covert action has historically been approved through classified presidential findings reviewed by a tiny committee, not by open vote. In other countries, emergency laws allow the cabinet or even a single minister to greenlight special units that, officially, do not exist. This suggests that the throne of decision-making is not the legislature, but a small inner circle operating under permanent exception. So far, we have looked at structure. However, as we learn from real case studies, vague authorizations turn that structure into a blank check. Open-ended mandates to fight terrorism, subversion, or extremism do not name enemies, borders, or time limits. They are symbols of endless conflict written into law. Once passed, the same sentence can justify a drone strike, a proxy militia, or a deniable raid by a unit whose name never appears in public records. Member states and alliances copy this language, so a single phrase spreads across continents and decades. Inside this machinery, legal advisors become as important as generals. Everything you need to know about a covert army may be hidden in the form of a memo. Teams of lawyers draft opinions explaining why a paramilitary strike is technically lawful, why a targeted killing falls outside assassination, or why contractors are not really combatants. Officially, the state abides by international law. In practice, the definitions are bent until they almost break, allowing operations that violate the spirit of the rules while staying within a carefully engineered letter. When we put all of this together, the picture is clear. The law is not only a fence around hidden forces, it is also one of their most effective camouflage tools. Classifications, exemptions, and interpretations turn the world government of rules into a landscape of secret corridors. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how those corridors lead to real, deniable units on the ground and how their existence eventually bleeds back into public view. The psychology of plausible deniability. Those secret corridors of law lead us straight into something even more unsettling. The psychology that makes hidden armies feel not only useful, but comforting to the people who authorize them. Today, we are speaking about the mindset that allows a leader to sign off on violence while still looking in the mirror and saying, "It is claimed I did nothing wrong." Plausible deniability is usually defined as a legal shield, a way for officials to say they did not know about a specific operation. But first, let's take a look at it as a kind of emotional armor. If you never put the order, "commit atrocity" on paper, if you never hear the words spoken in a formal briefing, you can tell yourself that what happened was an accident, an excess, a misunderstanding. This suggests that the real function of deniability is not just to survive courtrooms, but to survive one's own conscience. Inside this logic, covert violence becomes a necessary sacrifice for the protection of the nation, while the leader's hands remain symbolically clean. We will discuss this bargain in detail because it mirrors how the world government in one piece hides its own darkest acts behind polite ceremonies and distant thrones. A president, a general, or an intelligence chief can approve a stabilization program or a support package to foreign fighters, and officially, they are defending democracy. When those fighters carry out massacres, they can insist that such outcomes were never the intent. So far, we have looked at the outside story. However, as we learn from real intelligence cultures, the inside story depends on strict compartmentalization. Covert units live in a world of need-to-know silos, loyalty oaths, and euphemistic language. A team might be told only that they are neutralizing a threat. The analysts only see sanitized reports. The political overseers only read executive summaries. Each layer feels like it is operating in a gray zone, but never at the absolute moral edge. Ambiguity in orders is one of the most powerful tools here. A superior rarely writes, "Eliminate this person," when they can say, "Solve the problem, remove the asset," or "Ensure this government survives." In the form of these vague directives, power travels downward while responsibility travels nowhere. If a coup is bloodless, everyone claims strategic genius. If it ends in mass graves, the same sentence, "We never told them to do that," becomes the shield. This culture is attractive because it promises control without visible stain, a kind of empty throne of accountability where no single person ever has to sit and say, "I chose this." But if every actor along the chain can plausibly deny full knowledge, then who actually owns the consequences when a hidden army topples a government or wipes out a village? In the next part, we will follow that question down the chain of command to the level of units that officially do not exist and ask what happens when the mask finally slips and the world sees them. Symbolism 101. Flags, patches, and the art of not existing. When the mask finally slips, the first thing you notice is not a face. It is the lack of one. No flag on the shoulder, no country on the chest, just a professional silhouette that looks like an army but refuses to tell you whose. First, let's take a look at how open official power is supposed to work. In a normal military, symbols are a kind of contract. A flag on the sleeve, a national emblem on the beret, a unit patch on the shoulder all say the same thing. These people fight in the name of a state, under a visible chain of command, and under laws that, at least officially, can be traced back to elected leaders. The uniform is a walking signature. It tells civilians who is responsible if things go wrong. However, as we learn when we move into the world of hidden armies, that contract is deliberately broken. Deniable units often wear the same cut of uniform, the same level of gear, but stripped of identifying marks. Sometimes they add improvised symbols in the form of colored armbands, tape, or generic patches. Sometimes they simply borrow the insignia of local forces they are pretending to be, so that, on paper, the violence belongs to a different flag. This suggests that the state wants the capability of a modern army without the accountability that usually comes with it. So far, we have spoken about symbols as clear labels, but ambiguous insignia are just as important. Many of these units adopt designs that could belong to almost anyone: an eagle without a crown, a skull without text, a number or Greek letter with no national reference. To the outside world, these marks are meaningless, which gives leaders room to deny any connection. Inside the group, though, they function like a secret language, building identity, hierarchy, and pride. You know who belongs, even if no one else can prove it. The psychological effect on civilians and opponents is profound. When you see soldiers who move, coordinate, and equip themselves like a state military but whose uniforms refuse to answer the basic question, "Who sent you?" it creates a special kind of fear. You are not just facing force, you are facing uncertainty. If there is no visible flag, which court, which government, which world government-style assembly of member states could you even appeal to? In that silence, rumor and myth do most of the work. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know regarding the most important symbol of all: absence. The deliberate removal of flags, names, and ranks becomes its own statement, a visual throne of emptiness. It is claimed that these forces do not exist, and their uniforms are designed to make that lie look true. In the next section, we will discuss this in detail by following how that non-existence is maintained on paper, in budgets and laws, long after the boots have left real footprints on the ground. Official story versus visual reality. On paper, the army has vanished. On screen, it keeps walking back into the frame. This is where the official story collides head-on with visual reality. First, let's take a look at the language. In press briefings, these fighters are almost never called soldiers. Instead, it is claimed they are local volunteers, self-defense forces, or concerned citizens taking up arms. The wording is deliberate. Volunteer suggests spontaneity, not chain of command. Self-defense implies reaction, not projection of power. However, as we learn from the footage coming out of these conflicts, the labels and the images do not line up. Because when you freeze frame the videos, what do you actually see? You see night vision raids with synchronized entry, stacked formations, and hand signals that belong to trained professionals, not weekend militias. You see precision strikes coordinated with laser designators and drones loitering overhead, the kind of combined arms choreography that usually requires a staff officer and a radio net, not a neighborhood watch. This suggests that behind the mask of locals, there is an embedded structure of instruction, logistics, and planning that looks very much like a hidden army. In addition to the tactics, the tools themselves betray the story. Officially, these are ragtag defenders using whatever they can find. Yet on camera, we see specialized vehicles without license plates, uniform night vision goggles across entire units, and encrypted radios whose frequencies match those used by foreign special forces in other theaters. The gear appears in the form of identical optics, standardized body armor, and medical kits laid out like a field hospital. It is claimed that such equipment fell into their hands, but the consistency is its own symbol of centralized supply. Around this, we start to hear a different kind of narrative: the controlled leak. Anonymous officials tell major outlets that advisors might be present, that no boots are on the ground, only eyes and ears. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know regarding how those hints work. They create plausible deniability for the world government level players and for powerful member states. floating the idea of involvement without ever putting a nameplate on a uniform. So far, the story remains technically intact, even as the pictures keep undermining it. This tension becomes most obvious when governments insist, in absolute terms, that no troops are on the ground, while journalists are literally filming fighters using foreign-made rifles with factory-fresh attachments, moving in doctrinal patterns copied straight from that nation's training manuals. The official voice says absence, the lens records presence. In practice, the truth of a hidden army often leaks visually long before it is admitted verbally. The camera catches these same faces cycling through different local conflicts, the same vehicles reappearing with only the flags repainted, the same tactics migrating across continents. Another symbol of this system is that silence at the podium grows louder as the archive of images grows thicker. In the next section, we will discuss this in detail by following how those images, once dismissed as coincidence or conspiracy, slowly force their way into budgets, inquiries, and finally, into history itself, long after the press briefings have moved on. Pattern interrupt, the logo that shouldn't exist. So far, we have been following real photographs and documented deployments. For a moment, let's step away from the archive and look at something that does not officially exist, but absolutely could. Today, we are speaking about a single patch. No motto, no flag, no unit number. Just a black shield, a faint stylized globe etched in charcoal gray across the center, and nothing else. First, let's take a look at what that actually says. The shield shape is old language, the language of knights and heraldry, of people who stand between a ruler and the outside world. In modern terms, it is the outline you see on police badges, on elite military crests, on the doors that separate the public building from the secure wing. This suggests that whoever wears it believes they are the inner guard of a throne, even if that throne is never acknowledged on paper. Across that shield sits the globe, but not with clear continents you could match to a map. It is claimed to be abstract, just arcs and meridians, yet the message is direct. Global reach, operations that cross member states, borders, and legal jurisdictions. In the form of a simple curve, you have everything you need to know about how far this hypothetical unit expects to go, and how little it cares about lines on a conventional map. Then there is the color, almost pure black with barely visible contrast. No national colors, no eagles or lions, no obvious reference to a service branch. Officially, that absence is just design minimalism. However, as we learn from real-world practice, it is also deniability stitched into fabric. If a camera catches it in the background of a convoy or a raid, it is just a dark blur. If a government is questioned later, nothing in that symbol ties it openly to the state. Inside the system, though, a mark like this would still matter. You might see it engraved on a challenge coin passed quietly in a hangar, embossed on the corner of a redacted briefing folder, or laser-etched onto private gear that never appears in recruitment brochures. Never on parade uniforms, never at public ceremonies, never on the podium when ministers speak about the world government they claim to fully control. Online, patterns like this do not stay invisible forever. Forum users, open source investigators, and veterans with long memories begin to notice the same black shield surfacing in footage from different conflicts on different continents over different years. They freeze frames, compare angles, argue over whether the globe curve is the same. Piece by piece, they assemble a map of a force that, on paper, is nowhere. This narrow visual example interrupts our flow on purpose. It shows that even in the deepest secrecy, humans still reach for a symbol to define who they are. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how those quiet emblems, once connected and archived, start pulling entire hidden chains of command into the historical record. Language as camouflage, euphemisms of the shadow. So far, we have followed the trail of symbols on patches and flags, but the next layer of concealment is not visual at all. It lives in sentences of briefings, in the titles of PowerPoints, in the way a report can describe a battle without ever admitting that an army was there. First, let's take a look at the most common phrases that appear when a state wants to describe war without saying war. A drone strike becomes a kinetic action. Foreign combat troops embedded with local units are rebranded as an advisory mission. A reinforced occupation force is introduced to the public as a stabilization force. Each of these terms sounds technical, even responsible, but notice what disappears. There is no clear attacker, no clear defender, and no explicit admission of who is fighting and dying. This suggests that language itself is being used as a kind of armor, protecting the world government or any government from direct accountability. Codenames push this even further. An operation to topple a regime is not spoken of as the seizure of a capital city. It is Operation Dawn Spear or Project Nightfall. A clandestine regiment deployed across several member states is not the 3rd Covert Infantry, but Task Element Orion. Once real places and real people are converted into abstract project labels, lethal actions can be discussed in meetings the same way one might talk about a software rollout or an infrastructure upgrade. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know regarding how this bureaucratic style makes it psychologically easier for officials to approve violence from the comfort of a conference room. Inside internal documents, the same logic appears in the form of organizational euphemism. A deniable combat formation that is, in practice, the size of a battalion will be described as a task force. A network of safe houses, trainers, and logistics officers spread across a region is reduced to a cell or node. Officially, these words sound small, flexible, almost harmless. However, as we learn from later declassifications, those labels can mask full chains of command, air support, intelligence links, and proxy militias that never show up as formal brigades on any order of battle. Over time, this language leaks outward. Journalists briefed off the record repeat phrases like limited kinetic engagement or train and assist mission. Commentators speak about security cooperation instead of proxy war. The public hears that something serious is happening, but the lack of clear armies, flags, and fronts makes it feel like a distant management problem rather than a conflict with real soldiers and civilians at risk. In effect, the idea that some wars simply do not have recognizable armies attached becomes normalized, and behind every bland phrase in a report, there may be an entire hidden structure. Training camps dug into remote hills, airstrips lit only at night, warehouses of ammunition, and fighters who officially do not exist. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how, once you decode that language and follow the money, those invisible structures begin to surface, and how one overlooked budget line can expose an entire shadow army sitting just behind the empty throne of official policy. The hidden truth layer. Who actually commands the ghosts? So far, we have followed the money and the concrete, seeing how ghost bases and ghost budgets appear just behind the empty throne of official policy. Now, we have to ask the question almost no one on television ever asks: if this secret army exists, who actually commands it? Today, we are speaking about the layer of control that sits above the uniforms and even above most ministers. Officially, the story is simple and reassuring. Democracies tell you that elected leaders sit at the top, that parliaments authorize every use of force, and that clear chains of command run from the head of state through defense ministers to generals in the field. It is claimed that oversight committees, auditors, and courts watch every rifle that leaves a warehouse. On paper, this is everything you need to know about how violence is controlled, transparent, lawful, and ultimately answerable to the voter. However, as we learn when we follow those black budgets and deniable units, there is usually a second diagram that never appears in public. First, let's take a look at this hidden structure. At its core is a very small inner circle, A few senior intelligence chiefs, select special advisors, and sometimes the head of state in person. They are briefed on the full scope of covert forces, including paramilitary wings inside intelligence agencies, private military companies on retainer, and proxy militias financed through cutouts. Around them, even cabinet members only see slices. Compartmentalization is the main technique that keeps this possible. Each program is broken into cells. A general might know of a training mission in the form of support to local forces, but never see the parallel operation that arms those same forces for an off-the-books offensive. Intelligence officers might run logistics through shell companies that officially provide security consulting to member states. This suggests that many of the people wearing stars or sitting in parliament are managing fragments of a puzzle whose full picture they are never allowed to assemble. Because knowledge is concentrated, so is power. When only 5 or 6 people know where the hidden army really is, they can steer foreign policy without a single public debate. They can escalate a proxy war, tilt a coup, or sabotage a peace process simply by redirecting deniable units while the visible military stays in barracks. Domestically, that same leverage becomes a political weapon. Secrets about past operations or the threat of exposing them can discipline ambitious ministers and even elected leaders. In the next part, we will discuss in detail how this has played out in the real world, looking at historical cases where inner circles used secret armies to redraw borders and topple governments while parliaments remained in the dark, and how, years later, a few leaked documents or a single trial suddenly revealed that the official story had never been true. Who knows, who suspects, and who pretends not to? So far, we have looked at what secret armies do on the ground. Now, we need to map who actually understands that this hidden force exists. In other words, if a war is being fought off the books, who is really sitting on the invisible throne that commands it, and who is only pretending to see an empty chair. First, let's take a look at the innermost circle. This is the core group with full knowledge, the planners, commanders, and logistics officers who run the day-to-day operations. They know the real unit names, the real bases, the real supply chains. In the real world, this might be a paramilitary wing inside an intelligence agency, funded through a classified budget and coordinated through secure channels that never appear in normal military orders. They sign the deployment papers, approve the targets, and arrange the planes that do not officially exist to move people and weapons across borders. Around them, we find the next ring. Politicians and senior officers who suspect or are vaguely aware but lack details. They are told in the form of hints, code phrases, or carefully worded briefings that assets are available or that support can be arranged. It is claimed that this keeps them focused on strategy rather than tactics. However, as we learn from historical examples, it also lets them deny specifics later. When a covert coup or proxy war finally comes to light, these figures can say, truthfully in a narrow sense, that they never saw the operational plans, never signed the explicit order, never read the cable that used the word assassination. A third circle practices what we could call useful ignorance. These are ministers, legal advisors, and even some heads of member states who deliberately avoid asking questions. Officially, they defend this as protecting national security or maintaining plausible deniability. In practice, they do not want to know whether a particular militia is being armed by their own government or whether a private military company on contract is effectively a secret army. This suggests that ignorance can be a kind of power. By staying just outside the line of knowledge, they can survive scandals that might destroy more informed colleagues. Beyond this, the awareness map becomes even stranger. Allies, rival states, and journalists often know more than the domestic public. Foreign intelligence services track the movements of unmarked aircraft, count the weapons flowing into conflict zones, and quietly adjust their own strategy. Investigative reporters pieced together shell companies, black budgets, and veteran testimonies. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know to see how, in some cases, outsiders can describe the shadow army in more detail than citizens whose taxes are paying for it. All of these layers combine to make democratic accountability almost impossible. Very few people have both real knowledge and the formal power to act, and those who do are often embedded in the same secret architecture they would need to dismantle. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how this gap between knowledge and power lets hidden forces commit crimes, reshape borders, and then vanish back into the dark the moment anyone tries to follow the chain of command. Cliffhanger case file. The coup that wasn't there. So far, we have been talking in the abstract about hidden chains of command. To see what this looks like when it hits reality, we need a concrete case file. Today, we are speaking about a coup that, on paper, never had any foreign fingerprints at all, yet it reconfigured an entire region in the span of 48 hours. First, let's take a look at the setting. A small, fragile state on the edge of bankruptcy, squeezed between rival blocks of great powers and dependent on foreign aid just to pay its civil servants. The president rules by decree, opposition parties are harassed, and the regular army is underfunded and divided along regional lines. When the coup comes, it is claimed that it erupts from inside this weakness. A group of dissident local officers seize the palace, arrest the cabinet, and announce a patriotic transitional council on state television. Officially, that is the story. However, as we learn from the sequence of events, something else is moving behind the curtain. Communications across the capital and key provincial cities fail at the exact same minute. Not in the form of random outages, but as a clean, layered jamming of radio, mobile networks, and even satellite uplinks used by foreign embassies. Armored units that were supposedly loyal to the president are neutralized in precision night raids with fuel depots, radar sites, and the main broadcasting tower all captured within a single hour. Before most citizens even understand that anything has happened, 3 major foreign capitals issue statements recognizing the new authorities and calling for stability. This suggests that a force with far more training, planning, and intelligence support than a handful of disgruntled majors is directing the operation. Years later, leaks and declassified files begin to surface. Budget lines from a black program that never went through normal parliamentary oversight. Training photos of the coup leaders on a foreign base, their insignia removed. Internal memos from an intelligence service describing a deniable advisory cell deployed to support indigenous partners in regime change. We will discuss this hidden unit in detail later, but the outline is already clear. A foreign state has built a small, highly skilled formation whose soldiers never wear national flags, never appear in official orders of battle, and are paid through shell companies and intelligence budgets instead of the regular defense ministry. They select the officers to back, design the battle plan, provide encrypted radios and real-time satellite imagery, then step aside so that the world sees only local faces on the throne. During the crisis itself, that sponsoring government stands before the cameras and declares it had no involvement. Its diplomats point to the lack of uniformed troops crossing borders as proof that this is a purely domestic affair between member states of the international community. The world government-style fiction holds, at least for a while, because the legal system still treats no flags as no responsibility. But once such a non-existent army has been tested abroad and proven effective, what happens when its commanders quietly turn their attention inward and begin to treat their own society's elections, protests, and rival factions as just another battlefield to be shaped from the shadows? Speculation break. Could a modern superpower run a global ghost army? To answer that, we need to step into a clearly marked speculation zone. What follows is not a claim about any specific state, but an informed extrapolation from historical patterns, present technology, and how world government-style systems tend to protect their real centers of power. First, let's take a look at the basic architecture. Imagine a modern superpower that officially fields a normal army, navy, and air force, but quietly builds a second deniable structure in the form of intelligence-run paramilitary hubs on every continent. Each hub would sit under an intelligence service rather than the regular military, because that moves operations into a classified legal space and away from the visible throne of democratic oversight. So far, we have seen versions of this in real history whenever covert action branches run their own training camps, airstrips, and safe houses. Around those hubs, the state could weave a web of private military firms. On paper, these are independent companies providing security, logistics, or training to member states and fragile governments. In practice, however, they are staffed by veterans from the same special units, funded through the same intermediaries, and steered by the same small circle of officials. This suggests that a single phone call from the center could reassign teams from guarding an oil field in one region to backing a coup in another. To extend reach even further, the hubs would cultivate proxy militias in key regions, coastal forces near choke points, desert groups along smuggling routes, urban networks embedded in protest movements. Officially, these are local actors with their own flags and grievances, yet weapons, salaries, and targeting data flow quietly from the intelligence hubs and their corporate partners, tying everything into one hidden order of battle. Now, we add 21st century tools. Cyber units would map foreign ministries, banks, and media systems, preparing to blind or blackmail opponents before a single deniable soldier moves. Drones and small satellites would give the Ghost Army its own reconnaissance layer, so it never has to rely on public military channels. Surveillance programs at home and abroad would flag activists, officers, or business elites who might resist, turning every operation into a fusion of hacking, data mining, and on-the-ground coercion. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know to see how digital power and physical force merge. Inside the state, who knows? Likely a narrow ring, intelligence chiefs, a few senior military planners, select ministers of finance and foreign affairs, and staffers who manage black budgets. Funds are laundered through development aid, counterterrorism assistance, disaster relief, even cultural exchanges. Money moves, it is claimed, to stabilize partner nations. In reality, a slice pays for training camps, cutouts, and clandestine airlifts. Pattern interrupt. Notice what we have not mentioned: parliaments, courts, or ordinary voters. Officially, they see only normal treaties and televised deployments. So, if such a structure existed today, could we ever prove it, or would we only glimpse its fingerprints in oddly timed coups, vanishing rebels, and crises that always seem to benefit the same invisible hand? Void spaces in the record, wars that officially never happened. So far, we have been talking in the abstract about a hidden army. To see how that would work in practice, we need to step into the historical voids where wars were fought, bled for, and buried under the word officially. Today, we are speaking about conflicts that, on paper, did not exist. First, let's take a look at what we might call secret wars. These are not small skirmishes. They are multi-year campaigns where major powers deploy aircraft, special forces, and entire advisory missions while insisting to their own member states that they are not at war. In Southeast Asia, for example, entire bombing campaigns were conducted over countries that were never named in formal declarations. It is claimed that these were merely operations, not wars, even when the tonnage of explosives exceeded declared battlefields. These shadow conflicts rely on deniable tools. Instead of regular divisions, you see advisors, trainers, and contractors. Instead of national flags, you see proxy militias and private companies that can be disavowed if captured. Covert air support flies from bases that do not appear on public maps, supplying units whose existence is buried in black budgets and intelligence annexes. This suggests that the state can project power without ever mobilizing the public, because officially, nothing is happening. However, as we learn when the documents start to leak, someone was there. Soldiers are attached to intelligence outfits, so they fall under different legal frameworks. Pilots fly missions logged under code names instead of campaigns. Casualty reports are fragmented across agencies, so no single office can see the true cost. On the ground, villagers watch uniforms arrive, houses burn, and front lines shift, while the world government-style capitals speak only of advisory roles and limited engagement. For the people who fight these wars, the erasure is not theoretical. Veterans of classified campaigns often return to a country that, officially, has no record of where they were. Their medals cannot be worn, their missions cannot be described on benefit forms, and injuries sustained under a cover story become bureaucratic puzzles. Some wait decades for declassification before they can even prove they served in combat. In the meantime, their memories exist in the same gray zone as the units they belong to, real in the body, unreal on the books. Historians later move into this void space in the record. They piece together flight logs, declassified cables, and budget lines that once appeared only as other procurement. They interview local witnesses whose villages never appeared in official maps, and they read memoirs that finally named the valleys and cities where no war was fought. Over time, a shadow outline becomes a clear campaign, with start dates, orders of battle, and chains of command that were denied at the time. In addition to restoring factual detail, this reconstruction exposes how history can be actively erased in real time. Armies that do not exist can still topple governments, redraw borders, and leave minefields behind for children to find decades later. The archive simply lags behind the reality on the ground. And when those archives crack open, we suddenly see that what looked like isolated crises were coordinated moves by the same invisible hand we are tracking in this blind review. The question, then, is not whether such voids can exist, but how many of them we are living through right now without a name. Ancient patterns, secret forces before the modern state. So, if our archives can be full of voids, our armies can be as well. Before we talk about classified budgets and modern black ops, today we are speaking about an older pattern, rulers fielding forces that officially were never really theirs. The technology was different, but the logic of hiding power in plain sight is much older than the modern state. First, let's take a look at the pre-modern equivalents of a secret army. Medieval kings and princes rarely relied only on their formal levies. They hired mercenary companies, maintained private retinues, or leaned on religious orders that could move across borders. A crusading order, a band of Italian condottieri, or a warlord's household knights could all act in the form of semi-deniable muscle. If a raid went too far, it was claimed that the ruler never ordered it, that these were overzealous servants acting on their own. In practice, this meant that violence could be projected without the throne appearing directly involved. We will discuss this delegation of force in detail because it mirrors so much of what we see later. A king could send a mercenary captain to burn a rival's port while his own banners stayed home. A duke might unleash a religious order on heretics, then insist that church law, not secular law, was responsible. The overlapping loyalties made it easy to blur the chain of command and to deny whatever became politically inconvenient. As states grew richer, this logic scaled up. Early modern powers like the British and Dutch crowns used chartered companies as weapons. The East India Company or Dutch East India Company were, on paper, commercial ventures. However, as we learn from their charters, they could raise armies, build forts, and wage war against both local polities and rival member states. The world government of that era did not sit in a single capital, but these corporate flags became a symbol of royal power with a built-in layer of plausible deniability. This suggests that what we now call proxies are simply the latest version of a very old tool. Then, it was mercenaries and companies. Today, it might be militias, contractors, or intelligence front units. In every case, We see the same three traits: deniability, multiple masters, and the ability for the patron to disown atrocities while still enjoying the strategic results. Yet, these arrangements were never fully safe. Mercenary bands in Italy switched sides mid-campaign. The East India Company effectively conquered territories and forced the British state to absorb its debts and wars. Frontier tribes armed by empires carved out their own kingdoms. So far, the pattern is that outsourced violence has a way of slipping the leash. And that brings us back to our hidden armies. If pre-modern rulers could lose control of sword-for-hire companies, what happens when today's deniable forces have satellites, drones, and global finance behind them? The missing chapters. What official histories leave out? If outsourced violence slips the leash, the next trick is to pretend the leash never existed. The modern world government of nation-states has developed a very simple technology for this. It edits the story, not on some distant throne of fantasy, but in the most mundane place possible, in the form of school textbooks and official histories. First, let's take a look at how those books are structured. You get neat chapters on great wars, clear timelines of treaties, maps of member states changing color. It is claimed that this is everything you need to know about a country's use of force. However, as we learn when we compare timelines, the pages go strangely quiet whenever covert interventions or secret armies should appear. Instead of naming a foreign unit that trained death squads or a deniable battalion that toppled a government, you see phrases like, "A period of instability followed," or "The regime collapsed amid internal tensions." The techniques of omission are subtle. A coup becomes a transition. An externally funded militia becomes rebels. Whole campaigns are compressed into a single passive sentence, with no subject, no clear agent, and therefore no responsibility. This suggests that the missing chapters are not an accident. They are supported by the way archives themselves are built. Classified budgets and sealed intelligence files create a hard boundary for most historians. Officially, they are told to wait 30 or 50 years. In practice, many of the key documents on deniable forces, black budgets, and paramilitary wings simply never enter the public record. You cannot footnote what you are not allowed to see, so myths harden in the empty space. So far, this has produced some very visible fractures in national memory. When sudden declassifications happen, or when a whistleblower walks out with boxes of documents, entire narratives have to be rewritten almost overnight. A spontaneous uprising is reinterpreted as a managed operation. A civil war is revealed to have foreign officers embedded in command posts. The public discovers that wars which never officially happened still left graves, trauma, and secret medals locked in drawers. Today, we are speaking about that exact moment of collision between the polished story and the hidden army. We will discuss this in detail later with specific case studies, but the pattern is already clear. The more a state relies on deniable violence, the more it must control the historical record, because even a single leaked memo can expose the distance between what was claimed and what was actually ordered. And this is where you come in. By following the trail of this invisible force, you are effectively peeking into those missing chapters in real time, reading between the lines of instability and regime change, to ask who was really holding the gun. The question now is, what happens when we stop accepting the official table of contents and start reconstructing the book from the burn marks? Pattern. Interrupt. Imagine the future Truth Commission. So instead of staying in the burn marks first, let's take a look at the end of the book. Imagine it is 40 years from now. A special Truth Commission is convened, not in the form of a show trial, but as a slow, methodical excavation of everything you need to know about the secret wars of our era. Cameras are rolling. The room is full of gray hair, medals, and lawyers. On one side sit aging officials who once stood behind podiums and said, officially, that certain units did not exist. They swore the flag only covered regular forces, that any talk deniable armies was conspiracy. However, as we learn, time is a ruthless cross-examiner. Now they are under oath, answering precise questions about operations that were never on any public budget line, carried out by soldiers who were ghosts on paper. Across from them are veterans from those deniable forces. Some arrive in civilian clothes because their uniforms were never meant to be seen. Today, we are speaking about people who were ordered to forget where they went, what they did, and sometimes who they were. They described night landings in countries their own member states claimed were respected partners, raids that toppled leaders while the world government of their time spoke only of internal instability. Each testimony is both a confession and a reclamation of self. The emotional weight in that room is heavy. You have operators who spent decades unable to admit they were even in a war, now trying to explain to grandchildren why certain years of their lives are redacted. You have families of civilians killed in non-existent battles, finally hearing the word yes instead of "it is claimed we were not involved." This suggests that the real battlefield was not only foreign soil, but the gap between lived experience and official memory. Around them, historians work like forensic archaeologists. They project declassified satellite imagery, matching blurry shapes of helicopters to flight logs that were once buried in black budgets. They cross-reference leaked documents with survivor accounts, reconstructing chains of command that hopped from intelligence agencies to private military companies to anonymous militias. So far, the picture that emerges is not random chaos, but a hidden order of power that sat behind the visible throne of policy. And here is the real pattern interrupt. The commission keeps repeating one uncomfortable conclusion. Secrecy is always temporary. The hidden army of one era becomes the scandal of the next. What was never there becomes a timeline, a map, a list of names and dates. So we have to ask, which current conflicts will one day sit on those screens? Which local uprising, counter-terror raid, or security partnership will a future commission quietly relabel as the work of forces that, right now, officially aren't there? In the next section, we will discuss how to recognize those fingerprints while the ink is still drying. Bases that don't exist. Geography of the Shadow Army. To see those fingerprints while the ink is still drying, we have to ask where the hand is actually resting. Today, we are speaking about the physical side of this invisible army, the bases that, officially, do not exist, yet quietly reshape the map. First, let's take a look at where you would put a force that must always be somewhere, but never be seen. The classic answer is the empty parts of the world. Remote deserts where heat haze hides fences, deep jungles where canopy swallows runways, frozen plateaus where a single hangar can be mistaken for a weather station. These places act as a kind of geographic cloak. A convoy can move for hours without passing a village. A helicopter can lift off without anyone filming it on a phone. And any strange noise can be written off as nature rather than power. However, as we learn from modern logistics, isolation alone is not enough. Many deniable bases sit in industrial zones near major ports or airfields, but just far enough from city centers that no one casually drives past. On an official zoning map, the site might appear as a research facility, a private security training ground, or a foreign cooperation center run under a vague agreement with one of the member states. The label is a kind of symbol on paper, reassuring and boring even if the reality inside the fence is anything but. The geography of deniability has very specific traits. Access roads are controlled and indirect, forcing any visitor through checkpoints that can be closed long before cameras arrive. Airstrips are built to civilian dimensions, painted with standard markings, and sometimes even share identifiers with nearby regional airports so that flight plans look routine. Fuel farms, radar, and communications gear may be buried or disguised in the form of warehouses and container stacks. Underground storage, cut into hillsides or sunk beneath hangars, means that the most sensitive equipment never appears in a casual photograph or a satellite shot taken at the wrong angle. So far, this sounds like the usual secrecy of any military. However, as we learn when we zoom out, the map is no longer controlled only by states. Commercial satellite imagery, flight tracking data, and open-source investigators now comb these landscapes. A new road in the middle of nowhere, an airstrip that suddenly lengthens, a cluster of identical buildings appearing next to a research park. This suggests that something more than science is happening. Even when a government insists that a base is civilian, heat signatures, aircraft types, and construction timelines can betray a different chain of command. In this way, the geography loops back to power. By anchoring their shadow army in these hidden nodes, states can project force across borders without ever deploying troops in the conventional sense. Planes lift off from nowhere, advisors arrive from a training center that is claimed to be private, and weapons flow from warehouses that officially store equipment. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how those flows connect into actual operations, the coups, crackdowns, and covert wars that are mapped only in hindsight. The capital's shadow districts. Those flows don't just vanish into abstraction, they converge on real places, in real cities, that you could walk past without ever knowing you were brushing against the brain of a hidden army. Today, we are speaking about the capital's shadow districts, the quiet blocks where intelligence directorates, covert operations centers, and logistics cells live behind glass and concrete. First, let's take a look at the buildings themselves. In almost every major capital, you find clusters of nondescript offices with mirrored windows, badge readers, and security cameras that seem a little too dense for an ordinary ministry. The sign out front might say, Government Services, or the name of a harmless-sounding agency. However, as we learn from declassified histories, these facades often hide situation rooms, encrypted communications hubs, and planning cells that direct deniable forces across multiple member states at once. The real story usually runs downward. Secure underground levels, accessible only by internal elevators or stairwells that do not appear on public floor plans, hold the operations centers that never turn off their lights. Separate entrances open into back alleys or parking garages. Unmarked vehicles in the form of plain sedans or vans with generic license plates cycle in and out at odd hours. It is claimed that these are just routine security details. Officially, nothing unusual is happening. Yet those same doors are where teams depart for airports under cover of night, carrying orders that will never appear on a public ledger. These spaces are often symbolically close to formal power, yet institutionally distant and opaque. You can stand on a corner where you see the Parliament Dome, a Supreme Court, or a presidential palace at one end of the avenue, and at the other end, an anonymous block that houses an intelligence directorate's covert action wing. The proximity functions as a kind of silent symbol, like an invisible throne room for the world government's most secret instruments. Decisions made inside those rooms can overturn a foreign election, greenlight a coup, or arm a proxy force, all while the visible institutions hold debates about budgets and treaties. For insiders, this geography has a powerful psychological effect. Imagine being a staffer who knows that behind a blank facade, a small group meets each morning to decide who will live or die in another country. You walk past protesters, tourists, and school groups who have no idea that a few meters away, a hidden chain of command is reviewing target lists and authorizing missions in conflict zones that do not officially exist. This suggests that the capital itself becomes a layered reality. One city for the public, another for those initiated into the Shadow Army's routines. So far, we have traced the infrastructure that lets this army think and move without being seen. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how those quiet rooms translate plans into action on the ground, and how coups, crackdowns, and covert wars can be launched from offices that look like any other address on the map. Cliffhanger Frontline, the village that met the ghosts. Those offices and conference rooms stay abstract until we see what their decisions look like in a single place, on a single night. So today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about how a hidden army feels on the ground in the form of one village that suddenly finds itself on the front line without ever appearing in a declaration of war. First, let's take a look at that village. It sits at the end of a cracked road, a cluster of low houses between fields, and a river that marks the border between two rival member states. Officially, it is a quiet agricultural community, a dot on the map that politicians mention only when they talk about development funds. However, as we learn, these forgotten dots are exactly where a deniable force can move most freely. The pattern begins the same way. On a moonless night, engines cut a few hundred meters away, and armed men walk in with night vision goggles and suppressed rifles. Their uniforms are clean, standardized, but unmarked. No flag, no unit patch, no name tape. To the villagers, they speak in the local language with a practiced accent, giving sharp, simple commands. Among themselves, in the gaps between orders, they switch to something foreign, a language tied to a capital city that, on paper, has nothing to do with this place. They move with the precision of a professional army. One house is surrounded but not entered, another is breached in seconds, a third is hit with a single rocket that sets the roof on fire but leaves neighboring walls intact. It is claimed that they are hunting terrorists, smugglers, separatists, depending on which rumor you hear at the well the next morning. What the villagers actually see are 3 men taken away with bags over their heads, one body left in the street, and a convoy that melts back into the dark, leaving only shell casings as a symbol that power has passed through. So far, no one knows whose power it was. When the families go to the nearest police station, the officers insist they had no operation scheduled. The army command of their own state denies crossing the river that night. Across the border, the neighboring government calls the allegations propaganda. International observers ask for insignia, serial numbers, flight logs, anything that would tie the raid to a recognized chain of command. There is nothing. The absence of a flag becomes the defense. If no emblem of a world government, no national badge, no recorded order exists, then, officially, no one acted. Legally, this changes very little. International humanitarian law applies to any organized armed group, whether or not it admits to the throne it serves. War crimes are defined by what is done, not by what is written on a shoulder. However, without an admitted perpetrator, courts have no defendant, sanctions have no clear target, and inquiries stall in diplomatic language about unverified reports. This suggests that the real battlefield is not only the village street, but the space between denial and proof. And here's the question that hangs over this one nameless place. How many other villages like this exist worldwide, briefly touched by ghosts in uniform, shaped by wars their own history books may never name? And how do we even begin to count a conflict that every side insists does not exist? Inside the bubble, daily life in a secret unit. If that village is the edge of the map, then the next step is crossing the border and asking, who actually lives inside this kind of war full time? Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about life inside the invisible barracks, the places where a hidden army stops being a rumor and becomes a daily routine. First, let's take a look at the physical environment of a covert unit's base. These are not grand fortresses with flags and parades. They tend to sit behind unmarked fences, buried inside existing installations, or hidden in plain sight in the form of anonymous office parks and training centers that even nearby residents cannot fully explain. Layers of checkpoints, biometric locks, and cameras enforce a geography of compartmentalization. One corridor for logistics, another for signals, a door that only opens for the people cleared to know a specific operation exists. So far, we have been looking at the villages that feel the impact from the outside. Here, Even the sky feels filtered through access levels. Inside that perimeter, the people are selected to match the walls. The selection process is not only about physical capability, it begins with psychological screening, background investigations that reach into school friendships and financial records, and loyalty checks that quietly measure how comfortable a candidate is with secrecy as a way of life. It is claimed that these filters protect national security, but they also create a culture that is intensely insular. Being chosen means being in on the secret, and that status can be as intoxicating as any promotion or medal. Daily life is structured to reinforce that mindset. Mornings might begin with intensive training, weapons drills on a range that does not appear on public maps, language classes tailored to the next theater, or rehearsals for operations that, officially, will never take place. After that, come classified briefings in windowless rooms where phones are left in lockers and the outside world shrinks to a series of code names on a screen. Off-duty hours still unfold inside closed compounds, gyms, bars, and dormitories where normal civilian rules do not fully apply and where the line between colleague and comrade is deliberately blurred. However, as we learn from testimonies, this closeness can also make it difficult to question orders or walk away. Within this bubble, there is a precise social hierarchy. At the top sit the operators, the people who go forward and whose stories are whispered with a mixture of admiration and fear. Below or alongside them, analysts translate satellite feeds and intercepted calls into targets, while logistics staff move weapons, money, and people without leaving obvious traces in any budget. Status is tied less to rank insignia and more to proximity to secrets. Who is read into which program, who has briefed which senior official, who can walk through the most doors without being stopped. This suggests that, inside a secret unit, information itself becomes a kind of throne, a symbol of power that orders the entire micro-society. Seen from above, these bases are the everyday domain of the gods of secrecy we discussed earlier. They are the human infrastructure that allows a state to project force while insisting, officially, that nothing unusual is happening. In the next section, we will follow that chain of command upward and ask how these hidden communities plug into the larger architecture of a world government that wants wars without witnesses and soldiers without public names. Perks, pressure, and the price of silence. So far, we have mapped the hidden neighborhoods where these units live and work in the shadows. Now, we need to ask a more personal question. Why would someone step behind that curtain and stay there, even as the world government insists, officially, that they do not exist? Today, we are speaking about the mix of perks, pressure, and silence that holds a secret army together. First, let's take a look at the incentives. A covert unit is often sold to recruits as the apex of service. Higher pay appears in the form of danger bonuses, unmarked allowances, and access to black budgets that mean better equipment than regular forces could dream of. Night vision that actually works, drones before they are publicly acknowledged, experimental armor that never appears on procurement lists. It is claimed that you are being invited to sit closer to the real throne of power, to join an elite that shapes events while the visible member states argue on camera. That material edge is paired with status. Inside the compound, these soldiers are the people regular special forces whisper about. They are told their missions decide wars before they start, that their work prevents chaos that could never be explained to the public. This suggests that the thrill is not just tactical, it is existential. You feel like you are stepping into everything you need to know about how the system truly operates, while everyone outside is watching a simplified version of history. However, as we learn from real Black operations communities, the price of admission is constant pressure. Secrecy does not end when the mission is over. It follows you home, into your marriage, into conversations with your children, into the blank space on your resume where the most intense years of your life should be. You cannot tell your family why you missed a birth, why you wake up at night, or why you suddenly have money you cannot fully account for. Achievements cannot be celebrated. Trauma cannot be openly named. Around that silence, the system builds hard legal walls, non-disclosure agreements, lifetime classification regimes, and the threat of prosecution turn memory itself into a controlled substance. We will discuss this loyalty culture in detail later, but the core is simple. You are taught that speaking out is not just disobedience, it is betrayal. Even retired operators know that a careless interview, a memoir, or cooperation with investigators could trigger legal action or quiet retaliation from institutions that still deny they ever commanded you. This is where moral injury enters. When operations are never officially admitted, there is no clear path to accountability or reconciliation. If civilians are harmed in a war that never existed on paper, there is no public inquiry, no court, often not even a grave with the correct date. Veterans carry responsibility without recognition, guilt without a forum, and questions about who gave the order when the chain of command was deliberately blurred. In addition to complicating our view of the state, this should complicate our view of the soldiers themselves. They are not just faceless agents of the world government's will. They are individuals locked into a structure that rewards silence, erases records, and then points to that absence as proof that nothing happened. In the next section, we will move from the personal cost back up to the strategic level and ask how commanders exploit this invisibility to run wars that even allied governments and oversight bodies are not allowed to see. Pattern interrupt when the secret leaks at the dinner table. However, instead of staying at the level of commanders and oversight bodies, first, let's take a look at what this invisibility feels like when it walks through a front door and sits down at a dinner table. Imagine a covert operator, technically part of a force that does not exist on any official roster. On paper, they are assigned to a harmless liaison office or listed in the form of an advisor under an intelligence agency. Tonight, they are just a son, a daughter, a sibling, back home for the first time in months. The plates are full, people are talking over each other, and then someone asks the most ordinary question in the world. So, what do you actually do? In that moment, all the abstractions of the hidden army collapse into a single, frozen second. This person has everything you need to know about a war in their head: the smell of a blown-out safe house, the panic of a mission gone wrong, the quiet moral doubts afterward. Officially, they are not allowed to say any of it, so they reach for the cover story that has been rehearsed and cleared. It is mostly analysis. We help coordinate with member states. Boring world government paperwork. The words are technically true, but the meaning is hollow. So far, we have spoken about secrecy as a strategic asset. Here, it becomes a social fracture. The operator wants to share the fear, the adrenaline, the guilt of watching decisions from a distant throne play out in real streets. However, as we learn from real clandestine structures, the obligation to maintain absolute silence is not just a rule, it is a survival mechanism. Talking out of turn can destroy careers, compromise missions, even put colleagues at risk. So, the truth is cut into pieces and buried under jokes about travel and long meetings. Loved ones notice what does not fit, nightmares that snap someone awake at 3 a.m, sudden trips that appear on the calendar with no destination, a birthday missed because something came up and no explanation follows. Parents may exchange a look that says they know something is wrong, but they have been trained by years of half answers not to press. Partners learn which questions close a face down. They live beside a person whose inner life has been redacted. This suggests that the hidden army is not just a geopolitical instrument, it is a pressure that reshapes private lives. In miniature, that dinner table is a symbol of the larger national dynamic. Citizens sit together talking about headlines, while a parallel reality unfolds in places that are never named, carried out by people who are not supposed to exist. If the person you love can fight in a war you are never fully told about, what does that say about the distance between you and your own state? Today, we are speaking about that distance as both an emotional gap and a deliberate design choice. In the next part, we will discuss in detail how planners exploit this silence, building legal and bureaucratic structures that keep these forces off the books even as they decide the fate of entire regions. The illusion of equality. Who gets protected, who gets exposed? So far, we have focused on how the hidden army is kept off the books. Now, we need to ask a harder question. Once you build a force that lives in the dark, who actually gets its protection, and who only meets it at the wrong end of a gun? First, let's take a look at how elites and politically connected figures interact with this shadow structure. Officially, every citizen is equal under the law, guarded by the same constitution, the same public chain of command. However, as we learn from real black budgets and deniable militias, access to secret force is not distributed evenly. Presidents, oligarchs, party bosses, or corporate magnates can quietly request discreet help in the form of surveillance on rivals, intimidation of union leaders, or covert support during an election crisis. It is claimed that these operations defend national security. In practice, they often defend careers, fortunes, and family dynasties. This suggests that the hidden army behaves like a private insurance policy for the top of the social pyramid. When a scandal erupts, witnesses are pressured. When a coup is brewing, friendly factions receive weapons from a unit that does not officially exist. When a foreign deal is threatened, a proxy militia appears on the ground. The same secrecy that protects the state from embarrassment also shields individuals who can speak the right language in the right secure rooms. On the other side of that equation are ordinary soldiers and civilians. The operators inside this world government-style apparatus are usually drawn from poorer regions, lower social classes, or marginalized communities. They take the greatest physical risk, yet if a covert raid goes wrong, they are the ones abandoned. A pilot shot down in a war that never happened. A contractor disavowed after a massacre. A local fixer disappeared after serving foreign intelligence. Their names are erased so the policy can survive. Civilians in the target area suffer even more. When a deniable strike misidentifies a house, it is the village that buries its dead while officials insist nothing occurred. Communities on the receiving end of this violence are rarely the capital city or the wealthy suburbs. They are distant provinces, borderlands, or entire foreign member states whose residents have almost no access to the throne of power. They may know exactly which unit attacked them, which base it flew from, which liaison paid the militia. But without records, without acknowledged chains of command, they cannot prove it. Courts demand documents. Parliaments demand budgets. The hidden army offers only rumors and classified annexes. In that sense, the very existence of a secret force quietly divides the population into two classes. One lives under visible laws, with uniforms, court-martials, and public debates about deployment. The other is ruled by invisible decisions, taken in secure rooms, implemented by units that move without flags or insignia. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know to see this division clearly, because this is the core illusion, a state that promises equal protection while running a parallel system of selective, secret power. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how that illusion is maintained day to day and what happens when the two systems finally collide in the open. Speculation Corner: who in your country might know? So far, we have looked at how a hidden army can sit beside the official one like a shadow next to a bright flag. In this section, we want to turn that lens back on you. This is the Speculation Corner. None of what follows is a claim about your country. Instead, today, we are speaking about patterns and inviting you to map everything you need to know from this video onto the institutions you actually live under. First, let's take a look at the kinds of people who would almost certainly need to know if such a force existed. In most systems, the heads of intelligence sit closest to the invisible edge of state power. Directors of national security agencies, chiefs of internal surveillance or foreign intelligence services often control budgets and units that do not appear in normal defense documents. Around them, you usually find a small circle of defense officials, sometimes in the form of deputy ministers, chiefs of staff, or commanders of special operations that are, officially, limited and deniable. However, as we learn from real history, secrecy rarely stops at uniforms. Long-serving legislators on security or defense committees, the people who never seem to leave those seats across multiple governments, often become quiet gatekeepers. It is claimed that they provide oversight, yet they are also the ones who approve classified budgets, black projects, and unusual legal exemptions. This suggests that if a hidden army were being maintained, at least a few of these figures would either understand its outline or have chosen not to look too closely. Think for a moment about which public figures in your country always appear during security crises. They stand at the podium after attacks, coups, or sudden operations. They speak the language of stability and necessity, but they almost never face detailed questioning on chain of command, casualties, or law. Who is always there and who is strangely absent when the cameras turn away from the official world government-style symbols of unity and peace? Media ecosystems complicate this picture further. State-aligned outlets repeat the official narrative in the form of brief statements and patriotic imagery, and rarely ask who actually gave the orders. Investigative journalists may uncover fragments, unusual payments, anonymous soldiers, or weapons with no clear origin. Foreign press might publish leaks that domestic outlets will not touch, precisely because they do not sit under the same throne of pressure and censorship. None of them see the whole map, but each may hold a different piece of the puzzle. So, if proof of a hidden army surfaced tomorrow, who would you trust to investigate? And who would you suspect of complicity? Would it be a court, a parliamentary inquiry, an international body, or a coalition of reporters? In the next section, we will discuss in detail how these questions of trust, denial, and selective truth shape the long-term stability of any regime that relies on forces it refuses to admit exist. When the ghosts slip the leash, blowback and rogue units. So far, we have focused on secrecy as a political shield, but what happens when the shield starts moving on its own? When a hidden army, a proxy militia, or a contractor network stops being just a tool and begins to act like an independent actor with its own throne, its own agenda, and its own enemies. In this context, blowback means that forces created for deniable missions redirect their skills, contacts, and weapons toward goals that no longer fully match what their sponsors intended. Today, we are speaking about units that were trained in sabotage, counterinsurgency, or covert logistics, and then repurpose those talents in the form of organized crime, terrorism, or private power. The world government of the real world, the loose system of member states and alliances, has seen this pattern repeatedly, even if it is claimed these were isolated mistakes rather than a structural risk. First, let's take a look at some examples. During the Cold War, militias armed to fight proxy wars sometimes evolved into cartels or warlord armies once the original conflict cooled. Intelligence services that built foreign, stay-behind networks for sabotage later discovered those same networks smuggling drugs, running protection rackets, or backing coups at home. In several regions, contractors hired to guard pipelines or embassies quietly expanded into parallel security empires, collecting unofficial taxes and influencing elections. This suggests that once you create a force that answers more to money, networks, and secrecy than to law, it will search for new patrons when the first one hesitates. However, as we learn from these cases, deniability itself becomes a trap. Officially, the state can say, "These are not our troops, these are independent actors." But if leaders admit they have lost control, they also admit the original secret, that they created, funded, or tolerated this army in the first place. If they pretend they still command it, they risk being blamed for every kidnapping, bombing, or coup the group carries out. Either way, The clean separation between the visible army and the invisible one collapses. Inside governments, this produces intense debates. Some factions argue for a crackdown, absorb the fighters into regular forces, strip licenses from private companies, or dismantle clandestine units through arrests and budget cuts. Others insist on co-opting them further, offering new contracts and legal cover in exchange for loyalty, because they fear what these groups might do if pushed into a corner. A third camp prefers quiet tolerance, hoping that limited excesses are a lesser evil than an open confrontation that could expose everything you need to know about past operations. In addition to these internal struggles, there is a deeper structural problem. A powerful army that officially does not exist cannot be openly disciplined, audited, or symbolically bound by the same laws and values the public sees on flags and constitutions. Its chain of command is ambiguous by design. That ambiguity is a source of power in covert operations, but it is also a source of instability because no one can say with certainty where responsibility ends. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how regimes try to reclaim that responsibility and what happens when they fail. Pattern interrupt, the whistleblower's dilemma. So far, we have looked at the hidden army as a structure, almost like another branch of the world government quietly operating behind the official flag. To interrupt that abstract view, first, let's take a look at a single person inside it. Imagine a mid-level analyst, not a movie spy, but someone in an office who reads reports and moves money on a screen. At the beginning, their work looks normal. The files are labeled counterterrorism, stabilization, support to partner forces. Everything is framed as protecting the member states and defending shared values. However, as we learn from real bureaucracies, patterns start to emerge. The same local militia shows up in 3 different countries. Casualty counts are redacted more and more. Operations are described only in the form of code names that never appear in public budgets. One day, our analyst notices that a unit which does not officially exist is receiving equipment and training. The legal authority is routed through an intelligence agency rather than the regular military, which keeps it off the books. It is claimed that parliamentary committees have been briefed, but the signatures are missing, and the chain of command ends in a blank space. This suggests that the deniable force we have been describing is not a theory for them. It is their daily task. Now, we shift perspective. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about the whistleblower's dilemma inside such a system. This person has options, and each one is a kind of battlefield. They can stay silent and tell themselves that elected leaders must know more. They can leak anonymously to a journalist, hoping the truth surfaces without their name attached. They can go to an internal watchdog or inspector general, or they can step into the light and become a public whistleblower, putting their own life on the record the way the hidden army never is. Every path carries risk. Silence means complicity if those units commit war crimes. An anonymous leak can be traced through metadata and narrowed down to a handful of suspects. Internal channels are often captured by the same hierarchy that built the secret program, so complaints vanish into classified vaults. Open whistleblowing brings legal prosecution under secrecy laws, exile to another country, loss of livelihood, and the very real possibility that nothing changes, because the policy is protected by people far above their pay grade. History shows us that this is not hypothetical. When Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, he exposed years of concealed escalation in Vietnam and helped turn public opinion, but he also faced charges that could have kept him in prison for life. Edward Snowden revealed global surveillance systems that, like a hidden army, operated beyond normal oversight. Reforms followed, yet he remains in exile. Chelsea Manning's disclosures about civilian casualties and covert actions led to intense debate and some reforms, but also to imprisonment and lasting personal cost. In each case, a faceless structure was challenged by a single, very visible face. The symbol of power was no longer only the empty throne of an unaccountable system, but the individual who refused to sit quietly beneath it. That is the pattern interrupt here. Hidden armies are not maintained by abstractions. They are maintained by people who sign forms, move funds, and decide, at some point, whether to look away. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how regimes try to close those cracks, and what happens when suppressed truths finally break into the open. The moral accounting. Who is responsible for a secret war? So far, we have followed the paperwork trail of a hidden army. Now, we have to ask the question that every classified memo carefully avoids. When that army tortures, disappears people, or topples a government, who actually owns the crime? Today, we are speaking about the moral accounting of a war that, officially, never happened. First, let's take a look at the chain of deniability itself. At the bottom, operators say they are just following orders, often seeing only a tiny slice of the mission. Above them, mid-level planners are compartmentalized, given narrow objectives and partial intelligence, told that what they do is necessary for national security. At the top, senior officials sign vague mandates, authorize flexible instruments or special activities without ever reading the names of villages on the target list. This suggests that responsibility is deliberately dissolved as it moves upward, like ink fading the closer it gets to the throne of power. International law, on paper, tries to cut through that fog. The Geneva Conventions and customary humanitarian law insist that these rules bind all parties to a conflict, whether or not they are officially acknowledged, whether or not they wear uniforms or belong to a declared army. It is claimed that there is no loophole for secrecy. Command responsibility, superior orders, and individual liability still apply. However, as we learn from real cases, applying that framework without named actors, unit designations, or even a recognized battlefield becomes almost impossible. Courts need defendants, not rumors. This is where the philosophical problem of collective responsibility appears. If a state wages a secret war in the form of black budgets, shell companies, and deniable militias, to what extent are its citizens morally implicated? On one hand, they fund the system through taxes, elect leaders, and benefit from the geopolitical outcomes. On the other hand, the very design of the operation is to keep them ignorant, to make sure member states and domestic publics can never clearly see what is done in their name. Are you accountable for a crime that your own government hid from you by design? Into that vacuum step international courts, human rights organizations, and investigative journalists. They try to reconstruct what was meant to vanish. Flight logs, satellite images, survivor testimony, leaked orders. Each report is a small act of resistance against erasure, turning collateral damage back into named victims and assets back into perpetrators. They cannot always punish, but they can document, and documentation itself becomes a counter symbol to the world government style of secrecy. In the end, this is the unresolved tension at the heart of any secret army. Power without transparency produces harms that no one fully admits to owning, but someone always pays for in broken bodies, ruined communities, and destabilized regions. Officially, no war took place. Unofficially, graves and refugees say otherwise. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how regimes fight to seal those records forever, and what it looks like when, despite everything, the buried evidence starts to surface. Threads pulled together, the illusion, the symbols, the ghosts. So far, we have followed the trail from individual operations to buried archives, but now we need to pull the whole structure into view. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about how an army can be built, used, and then erased in the same breath. When we line up the pieces, a pattern emerges that looks less like isolated abuses and more like a parallel system of power. First, let's take a look at the scaffolding. Official structures, black budgets, and dual chains of command create the frame for an army that can be deployed yet denied. On paper, there is a clear hierarchy, a lawful military, and approved missions. However, as we learn from declassified programs and exposed coups, a second track often runs underneath in the form of intelligence units with paramilitary wings, contractors funded through special activities, and shell companies that receive money no parliament can properly trace. It is claimed that elected leaders oversee all of this, but ambiguity in who signs which order allows everyone to say later that someone else was responsible. Around that hidden scaffolding, symbols do quiet work. Official uniforms, flags, and bases reassure member states that force is visible and accountable. The world government of our own era insists that badges and ranks mean traceability. Yet, the most sensitive units move with blank patches, euphemistic job titles, and anonymous buildings that look like warehouses or office parks. When language shifts from battalion to task element, from war to police action, this suggests that violence is being rebranded in advance, so it can be disowned if exposed. Historically, none of this is new. Medieval kings hired mercenaries and pretended they were merely pilgrims or companies beyond the throne's control. Secret orders and chartered companies waged colonial wars while crowns claimed distance. Today, private military contractors, proxy militias, and foreign volunteers repeat the same function in updated uniforms. The names change, the contracts get longer, but the core idea remains: a deniable army that can topple governments, guard resources, or fight in regions where an official flag would be too embarrassing. All of this rests on an illusion of equality. Officially, we live under the rule of law, with democratic control over armed force and equal rights for all citizens. Public ceremonies, national symbols, and constitutional language perform that story the way an empty throne in a fantasy world performs shared rule. However, when a parallel apparatus of unaccountable violence exists beside the visible military, some lives are implicitly worth less. The law applies unevenly, depending on whether you are inside the circle of protection or standing where the hidden army operates. Once you see this pattern, news, history, and political rhetoric start to look different. A localized security incident, a coalition of local partners, or a temporary facility might be fingerprints of that other army smudged across the record. In the next section, we will discuss in detail how regimes fight to keep those fingerprints blurred and what it looks like when witnesses, leaks, and survivors begin to sharpen the image. Speculation finale: if the Shadow Army vanished tomorrow. So far, we have been tracing how this second army hides in the folds of language and paperwork. To close, we should flip the premise entirely. Imagine waking up in a world where that is no longer possible, where every deployment order, every payment, every base location has to be logged in public, in real time, on a system anyone can audit. No black budget, no shell company, no intelligence exception. The Shadow Army is not reformed. It is structurally impossible. First, let's take a look at what that would do to foreign policy. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know about hidden force being a tool of quiet regime change, proxy wars, and plausibly deniable training missions. In this new world, the same ambitions would suddenly carry a visible price. If a government wants to back a coup, it must announce the flights, the funding, the advisors. Every member state of an alliance would see, in the form of a live ledger, who is actually sending men and material across borders. This suggests that some operations would simply never be attempted, not because leaders become more moral, but because the spectacle becomes too costly. However, as we learn from history, pressure does not vanish when secrecy disappears. It changes direction. Without covert battalions and off-the-books militias, states might lean harder into open brinkmanship, formal troop buildups, declared blockades, explicit security guarantees. There could be fewer wars that never officially happened, but more crises where armies face each other under cameras and parliamentary deadlines. The world government of our own era, loose as that phrase is, might look less like a web of deniable interventions and more like a stage of overt confrontations that voters can actually see. Domestically, the impact would be just as profound. Citizens would be forced to confront the full extent of their state's use of force, not 10 years later through leaks, but week by week on public dashboards. Election campaigns would unfold alongside maps of current deployments and casualty reports. A party could not claim to be reluctant about intervention while quietly expanding a contractor presence, because the contractor payroll would be right there, line by line. In such a system, debates over taxes, rights, and national identity would be inseparable from a continuous quantified record of how much violence the state actually buys. Pattern interrupt for a moment. Would everyone welcome that? It is claimed officially in many capitals that secrecy is necessary for security, that without some covert capacity, enemies adapt, allies hesitate, and operations fail. There is a serious argument that limited, tightly controlled clandestine tools could exist without sliding back into full hidden armies, perhaps under a small, cross-party supervisory body with automatic declassification deadlines. The question is whether any institution that sits on secret power, like a miniature, empty throne, can resist the temptation to expand it when fear returns. In the next part, we will discuss in detail how close or far our current world is from that transparency and what it means for you to live under a system where you may not control the armies, but you can refuse to be entirely in the dark. From ghost stories to your screen, why this matters to you. So far, we have treated hidden armies almost like a ghost story inside the machinery of the state. But this is not just an abstract problem for historians or lawyers. It changes how you read the news tomorrow morning and how you understand the quiet violence that can sit behind very ordinary words. First, let's take a look at the language. When you see a headline about military advisors, local partners on the ground, or a strike that is unattributed, that is often a polite surface over something much sharper. Today, we are speaking about everything you need to know to read those phrases as possible markers of deniable power. An advisor might be a member of a special operations unit, technically assigned to an intelligence agency, so they disappear into a black budget. A local partner might be a militia, armed, paid, and steered from a foreign capital, but never officially acknowledged as part of any world government's forces. This suggests that once you know these patterns, the map of a conflict looks different. You begin to ask who is actually flying the drones in the form of coalition support, or why a series of explosions is blamed on unknown actors, even while satellite images clearly show state-grade equipment. We will discuss this change in perception in detail in the next part, but the core idea is simple. Awareness does not give you secret documents. It gives you better questions. Even if your own country is not running a massive hidden army, you are not outside this system. Secret forces and proxy units in one region can push people across borders as refugees, rattle commodity prices, or drag reluctant member states into security alliances and peacekeeping missions. A covert war in one place can arrive in your life as higher food costs, a new base in your town, or political pressure to support an ally whose hands are not as clean as it is claimed. Officially, you might be told your state is only providing training or logistics. However, as we learn from historical cases, those words can sit on top of entire chains of command that never appear in public. This is why simple stories about purely good and purely evil actors are so dangerous. When media coverage frames one side as chaos and the other as order, it can hide the fact that both are using deniable units, private contractors, and intelligence-linked militias. Instead of asking which flag is more virtuous, you can start asking which structures of unaccountable power are being protected and which lives disappear into the gaps. The goal here is not to make you paranoid, it is to make you literate. To recognize that, in some stories, there is a missing cast of characters in the shadows, and that the empty throne of accountability in a conflict is itself a powerful symbol, and this is where this channel comes in. We try to build a space where these complex, uncomfortable systems can actually be unpacked, where we can move slowly enough to trace the invisible units behind visible events. In the final section, we will discuss in detail what you can practically do with that literacy and how not to look away when you suspect there is an army that officially does not exist. Final call to action: don't let the story end here. So far, we have followed this invisible institution from the first missing line in a budget, all the way to people whose lives are deleted in the form of a footnote or not mentioned at all. Today, we are speaking about how we close that loop without pretending the story is actually finished, because with hidden armies, the story is never finished while the records are still being edited. First, let's take a look at what we have actually mapped out together. We traced how an army can exist in the shadows: money disappearing into classified black budgets, bases that are officially logistics hubs but function as staging grounds, symbols and patches that never appear on public organizational charts, soldiers who operate under intelligence law instead of military law, and victims whose deaths are filed under accidents, insurgent infighting, or nothing at all. This suggests that when we hear the word security, we should also be hearing the quieter word secrecy standing behind it. However, as we learn from historical examples, this is not abstract. We saw how proxy militias and private contractors gave member states plausible deniability in coups and regime changes. We saw intelligence units that were denied on the record for decades, even as they shaped entire regions. And we saw how that ambiguity around who gave the order, who signed the contract, and who owned the base becomes a shield against accountability and a throne of unearned power. So, here is where you come in. Tell us in the comments which part of this hidden machinery disturbed you the most. Was it the idea of a soldier whose name never appears on a casualty list, the use of shell companies to move weapons, or the way victims are erased when a war is officially not happening? We will discuss these reactions in detail in future videos because your perspective helps us understand which parts of the world, government of real life, feel the most unreal. If you want more investigations at this scale, we do need your help. A like on this video, a subscription, and sharing it with someone who still thinks the official story is the whole story. All of that directly enables longer, riskier projects. It is claimed that these are small actions, but for a channel like this, they are the difference between a one-off upload and an archive of everything you need to know about power and secrecy. From here, the most logical next step is to go deeper into the institutions that command these forces. We have a full breakdown of intelligence agencies as the civilian side of this shadow army, and a playlist on proxy wars and covert operations that shows how deniable units can redraw borders without ever appearing on a map. If this video was the overview, those are the case files. Officially, we may never see every hidden army, every off-the-books unit, every erased victim. However, we can refuse to accept any narrative at face value. Staying curious, asking who benefits, and looking twice at every symbol and every silence is its own kind of resistance. The next question is simple. If this is what we can see from the outside, what does the inside look like when the doors finally open?